Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome to lesson number 9. This is regarding problem of return, another exceptional scenario that we will be learning in this video. Let's review our conceptual model of assigning shares one more time to understand this scenario better. The first thing we do when we are dealing with matters of inheritance is we look for the list of Zawul Furud that are alive. These are the relatives who have a fixed share mentioned in the Quran under specific conditions. We find them in the list, we assign their shares, and see what is left behind. Whatever is left then goes to the second tier relatives, which is the residuary or asba. Asba is a large category of relatives. However, if someone does not have any relatives among this category, then we come up with a scenario that is called Masla-Radd, problem of return, that the excess wealth that is left behind from Zawul Furuz goes back, circles back, and gets redistributed among those relatives. Now, in extremely rare scenarios, someone might not have anyone from Zawul Furuz category or Asba category, and then their wealth can go down to Zawul Arham or Baitul Mal, as we have learned in the second video of steps of wealth distribution. First, let's look at the evidence from where this is being extracted. This rule has been extracted from this ayah from Surah Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 6. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم النبي أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم. The Prophet is more worthy of the believers than themselves. In other translations, it is said, the Prophet has more claim over the believers than themselves. وَأَزْوَاجُهُ أُمَّهَاتُهُمْ, and his wives are their mothers. وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ, and the blood relationships are more entitled to each other in the book of Allah. And you can see in this translation and many other translations, you might see in parentheses it says they're more entitled to inheritance in the decree of Allah. Min al-mu'mineen wal-muhajirin, as compared to other believers and the immigrants. إِلَّا أَن تَفْعَلُوا إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِكُمْ مَعْرُوفًا, except that you do some ma'roof, some generosity or some act of kindness towards your friends, awliya. And that in this translation, in parentheses, they say this is through bequest, not through inheritance, but the will that you can write for them. كَانَ ذَلِكَ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَسْطُورًا, this was written in the inscribed book. So the part I want you to focus in this ayah is that it says those of the blood relationships are more entitled or more closer to a person than the other believers and the immigrants. Now this immigrants talks about the time of Rasulullah ﷺ when there was Ansar and the Muhajirin, the people of Medina and Mecca, that Prophet ﷺ created a bond of brethren between them. But later on, when these verses are revealed, it is telling us that in the sight of Allah, it is the blood relationships that come first, and they are more entitled to be closer to us. And hence the ruling that the distribution of wealth should first get redistributed among relatives before it goes out to the Baitul Mal or collective property of believers. We should keep one important point in mind over here. This rule and this ayah is talking about blood relationships. So this will exclude the spouses, which means that when we are trying to redistribute this property back to the Zawul Furuz, we would not redistribute it to the spouses if they are present. However, all other relatives in the Zawul Furuz category are eligible to get this redistributed wealth. For the spouses, their share will remain fixed as prescribed by Allah in the Kitab, that it is 1/4 or 1/8 for the wife in presence or absence of children, and for husbands it is 1/2 or 1/4 in the absence or presence of children. Now let's see how do we practically take care of this issue while solving this using our tables and our booklet. The first step is the same. We assign shares from table 1 as we would do in any other case. Then we go on to table 2 if we have leftover shares to be distributed. And in table 2, we start moving from left to right, finding any asba that is alive. And if we don't find anyone at all in this whole list, we move on to column number 24, which says Masla-Radd, or the problem of return. This is where we now have to redistribute the property among the Zibul Furuz. Let's do some practical examples. So there are two types of scenarios that can arise in Masla-Radd. One is a scenario without a spouse in the list, and the other could be with a spouse. The one without spouse is easy, so let's get started with this one. In this case, Sarah died on April 2nd, 2018, leaving behind $100,000. At the time of her death, she had her mother, one daughter, and one son's daughter and mother's mother alive. We put these relatives and this information in our template, and we go through table 1 now, finding shares of all these relatives. The mother gets 1/6 because there are children present, which is the daughter. The daughter gets 1/2, she is only one. And since there's only one daughter, son's daughter also get a share of 1/6. Mother's mother do not get anything as mother is alive. Our lowest common multiple over here is 6, so our fractions will turn into 1, 3, and 1 out of total 6. We have one share that is extra, which is left behind, and of course when we go through table 2, we don't find any relative who can qualify to get that extra one share until we reach column number 24, which is telling us that this is a Masla-Radd, a problem of return, and we need to redistribute that one share back to these relatives. In the absence of spouse, since we don't have any spouse in the list, this case becomes very easy. It is almost like Masla-All, that you just change the denominator to the smaller number this time instead of larger number in case of Masla-All. So you change it to the smaller number of 5 over here, and now everyone gets a slight increase in their share because the total pieces of the property, instead of being 6, are now turned into 5 pieces. So share of each category will be now 1, 3, and 1 out of total 5. Same is for share of each person because everyone is 1 in number over here. And then we calculate final shares. So let's reflect on this a little bit. We know mother was initially assigned 1/6. And if the total property is $100,000, then 1/6 of 100,000 is actually 16,666.66. But now we see since mother got some increase in share, as the total shares were reduced to 5, instead of 16,666, she gets $20,000. Similarly, the daughter was initially prescribed half, which should have been 50,000, but with her increase in share, she gets 60,000. So what interesting fact here is that the mother gets an increase of 3,333.33, and the daughter gets an increase of $10,000. So this increase is not equal, but it is proportional to the ratios in which they were originally getting their shares. So the increase in their shares is proportional to the actual sizes of the shares that they were initially assigned from our ratios from Zibul Furuz. Now let's go to the next case. In this case, we have a spouse present among the relatives. Adil died on September 4th, 2018, leaving behind $200,000. At the time of his death, following relatives were alive: a wife, mother, and a daughter. We put this information in our template and go through table 1. The wife gets 1/8 because there is a daughter present, so there is children. Mother gets 1/6 because we have a daughter present, and the daughter gets half because she's only 1. The lowest common multiple of 6, 8, and 2 is 24, which we put this down, and our ratios will turn into 3 out of 24, 4 out of 24, and 12 out of 24. The sum of all these numbers is 19, and we have 5 more shares to give. We go through table 2, and we do not find anyone whom we can assign these shares until we reach the column number 24, which says Masla-Radd, or problem of return. So we need to return back the 5 among these relatives. Now this is the tricky part. We know the spouse cannot get excessive share. The spouse's share remains fixed, and their return only goes back to blood relatives. So let's try to understand this step by step. The share of wife will remain same, which is 1/8, or in this case right now it is 3/24. So we just write this down and keep it as it is. We now need to increase the share of these relatives in the same proportion in which they are getting the shares. So first we need to find that out, that what is their proportion. How we do that is, but we just see how much is the total of these numbers that they are already getting. So the total shares these two relatives are sharing is 16 right now. Out of that 16, 4 is going to mother and 12 is going to daughter. This way we now know that what's the proportion of the distribution within these two relatives. Once we find that out, now we need to multiply this fraction with whatever is left behind after we have given the share of wife from the total property. So the total shares were 24, 3 are already taken out, so we are left behind with 21. Now we multiply these two fractions with 21 over 24. 24, remember, is the total shares, and 21 is what is left behind after 3 have been taken out from the wife. Now after this, it is simple mathematics to simplify these fractions. We know this 16 can be divided by 4, so we just do some simple cancellations. 1 over 4 and 21 over 24 can turn into 7 over 8. We multiply these numbers and it turns out to be 7 over 32. And for the daughter, 12 over 16 can be simplified as 3 over 4, and 21 over 24 can be simplified as 7 over 8, and the final numbers are 21 over 32. Our new fractions actually do not have the same denominator. Well, we can simplify this. This denominator for the new numbers will always be a multiple of the original denominator from the spouse's share, which was 8 in this case. 32 is a multiple of 8. So we can go back to 1 over 8 and see that if you multiply this whole thing by 4, you will get 32. Out of 32 shares, we have 4 for the wife, 7 for the mother, and 21 for the daughter. This will be the shares of each person, and then we do our final calculations to get our actual shares. So let's reflect on these numbers again. The share of wife was 1/8, and the 1/8 of $200,000 will be $25,000. That remains the same. The share of mother originally was 1/6, which should have been 33,333.33, but she got an increase and now it is 43,750. Similarly, the share of daughter originally was half, which should have been $100,000, and with her increase, it is now increased to 131,250. This way, we can clearly see that the share of wife was not increased, but other blood relatives was increased. Let's do one final example. In this case, Bilal died on December 16, 2018, leaving behind $300,000. At the time of his death, he had 2 wives, mother, 2 maternal brother, and a maternal sister. We put this information in our template. We look at table 1. We see that the wife will get 1/4 since there are no children, but there are 2 wives, so they will share this 1/4. The mother will get 1/6 because we have ikhwa, as we have 2 or more siblings, and the maternal siblings get 1/3 from table 1. Our lowest common multiple is 12, and our ratios will turn into 3, 2, and 4. The sum of 3, 2, and 4 is 9, so we have 3 extra shares to give. We go through table 2, and we do not find any asba relative that is alive or present in the list until we reach column number 24, which says Masla-Radd, and we have to redistribute these 3 shares among these relatives. We cannot change the ratio of the spouse. The wife's ratio will remain the same, which is in this case 3 over 12. For the others, we have to see in what ratio these remaining relatives were getting a share. So the total of these 2 numbers is 6, and out of that 6, mother was getting 2 and maternal siblings were getting 4. So it will be 2 over 6 and 4 over 6. And we multiply this by whatever is left behind from the total property after we have taken out wife's share. So we have given 3 parts to her out of the 12. What is left behind is 9 out of 12. So we multiply these fractions with 9 over 12. We simplify them a little bit. As we can simply see, 2 over 6 becomes 1 over 3, and 9 over 12 can become 3 over 4. And the total final fraction is 3 over 12. Similarly for the siblings, 4 over 6 becomes 2 over 3, and 9 over 12 becomes 3 over 4, and final fraction is 6 over 12. Our denominator, the common denominator, remains same, 12, in all 3 of these fractions, so we don't have to do any more calculations here. We put this down as 12, and share of each category would now be 3, 3, and 6. The maternal siblings are 3 in number, so 6 can easily be divided by 3. But this 3 has to be divided into 2 wives, which will give us a decimal. So let's just multiply this whole column and use 2 as a multiplier. Once you multiply that, we get 6, 6, and 12 out of a total 24. Share of each person would be that each of the wives will get 3, mother will get 6, and each of the 3 siblings, maternal siblings, would get 4 parts out of 24. We then do the final calculations and we get our answer. Again, we will see in this case that the total share of both the wives combined remains 1/4. The share of mother has actually increased from 1/6 to 1/4 now, and the share of siblings has increased from 1/3 to half if you combine the share of all 3 siblings together. This way we solve the problems of Masla-Radd. The problem is very rare, but as a student of inheritance, you should be able to identify Masla-Radd when you see one and should be able to calculate it in this way. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.